Hey, I'm Allie Bradley, and we were able to talk with Border Patrol Chief Mike Banks at 100 days under DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. What's been working? What does he think needs to change, or what kind of resources do they currently need? Well, in the interview with the chief, we learn how they're going to be expanding some of these national defense areas, providing more opportunity for military to be involved. We also talked with the chief about his feelings on going over to Mexico and military forces being utilized over there to combat the criminal cartels. Here's that conversation. All right, Chief Mike Banks jumping in here, talking about the first 100 days with Kristi Noem as DHS Secretary, obviously a new role for her. Let's start right there. What has been the most notable for you from where you sit as the Chief of Border Patrol under DHS Secretary Kristi Noem?
Well, I think the most notable is having a DHS secretary who actually understands what's going on the border and supports the men and women of not just the Border Patrol, but CBP as a whole. I have seen Secretary Noem, or have been side by side with Secretary Noem on the border more times in the first 100 days than the previous administration, the entire previous administration, spent on the border during its entire 4 years. She's down there, she's listening, she's seeing what's going on, and she's empowering the men and women of CBP to get the job done.
Now, Chief, when it comes to the messaging, obviously with Kristi Noem out in front at the forefront, Tom Homan out at the forefront, you as well, boots on the ground in every one of these kind of interactions with law enforcement down here on the border. How important is that messaging? You kind of just juxtaposed under the Biden administration kind of the lack of presence down here at the border. How important is that messaging for all of you guys to be boots on the ground, but also how important is that messaging to carrying out your mission where the president wants 0 people entering the country illegally?
So the messaging is of the utmost importance, and it's not just messaging, but it's the proper messaging. It's letting the world know that our borders are closed and you're not going to come here illegally. If you want to immigrate to this country, you need to go through a port of entry and do it the proper way. We're a welcoming country, but you've got to apply under the laws. And so I think messaging is just key and instrumental to us, because as you mentioned or alluded to earlier, the previous administration not only messaged that the border was open, but they went into 2 countries and said, hey, come to the border. Hey, apply for this. Hey, apply to the CBP One app. Where, and of course, surprise, surprise, the borders are open. Leadership is telling the world that the borders are open, and we had people from all over the world show up. But when you've got a secretary like Secretary Noem who's getting out ahead of the messaging and making sure they understand, don't put your life in danger, don't make this dangerous journey, because if you come, you're going to be apprehended, you're going to be prosecuted, and you're going to be deported. And so, once you message that there's consequences, and then we deliver those consequences by apprehending, the DOJ delivers by prosecuting, and then ICE delivers by deportation. All that messaging plus the consequences combined send a clear message that we're not going to tolerate this anymore. And so it starts with the messaging. If you message that there's no consequences for breaking the law, people are going to break the law. So we start with messaging, and it's been phenomenal. We are seeing not only a 95% decrease in cross-border traffic, but we've seen a 99% decrease in the Darien Gap. And from reporting on this over the last 4 years, Allie, that we gauge what's going to show up at our border by what's crossing in the Darien Gap. 99% decrease in the Darien Gap, because the messaging is getting out and it's clear. Don't put yourself in danger. Don't risk your life. Don't subject your children to the harsh treatments that they would receive crossing the border. And the messaging's working.
Right. Don't waste your money just to be turned around. Right. And with that being said, Chief, are we seeing notices to appear? Are we having people come in, released into the country right now? What is the processing? Say somebody from Mexico comes across the border right now illegally, what happens? And then let's say someone from Venezuela crosses the border illegally right now. What's happening to those 2 individuals during your term as chief and under the Trump administration right now?
So I'm proud to say that since President Trump took office and under the leadership of Secretary Noem, the United States Border Patrol has had 9 releases under a own recognizance in that first 100 days. I want to be very clear, 4 of those 9 releases were for material witnesses. Those are someone that served as a witness for the government in a case against someone else. 2 of those 4 have already appeared, given their witness statements in court, and have since been deported. 3 of the 9 were for serious medical issues, and they were temporarily released to get that medical attention. We will be deporting them once they're medically cleared to be returned to their country. Now, back to your question about Mexican nationals. If a Mexican national crosses and they're deportable, they're arrested, they're either prosecuted, depending on the crime, and then they're returned. But when they're returned, they're not returned right back across the border. They're returned deeper into southern Mexico so that they can't just turn around and create that recidivism problem and cross again. As far as Venezuela, Venezuela is now taking its citizens back, and so they will be held, they will be detained, prosecuted, and deported back to Venezuela.
Are there additional charges or more criminal infractions that are coming with someone entering the country illegally right now? Are they being detained and serving jail time here, or is that for if they re-enter illegally what they would face?
So it all depends on the crime. If this is their first time entering the country, they will serve time for illegally entering the country. Upon release from custody for serving that time that they're prosecuted for the illegal entry, they'll then be returned to their country. Now, if they commit any other crimes in that process between the time that they enter the country illegally and the time they're apprehended, they're absolutely prosecuted for any and all crimes that are applicable to the violations they committed. They will serve that time, at which time we'll pick them back up and we will send them out for deportation back to the country of their citizenship. And so, again, it just depends on, but we are prosecuting for every crime. Right now we have over 93% prosecution rate, meaning 93% of the people that we are apprehending are being prosecuted for violating one or multiple crimes.
What is that compared to the Biden administration? What were we seeing under them?
Phenomenal. To get a prosecution under the previous administration, it was absurd. You have to remember, Allie, and I know you've seen it from all the time you spent on the border. We were releasing people. We had no idea what crimes they committed. They weren't even being vetted. And then we're later finding things, like murders and robbery and assault on police officers in places like New York City. Those days are over. Secretary Noem on day one made it very clear the days of catch and release are over. That there will be consequences for crossing the border illegally. If you look at President Trump signed the Lincoln-Riley Act, the Lincoln-Riley Act, and you've got us enforcing that, and that says that if you have any type of known violent criminal behavior, right, that you absolutely would not be released. And to be clear, it's not just the Lincoln-Riley Act, but we are pulling out all the stops. If you look at areas that we've now declared the NDA, the National Defense Area, where it has turned into a military training facility, people are being prosecuted for Title 50, which is trespassing on a military installation, in addition to being prosecuted for illegal entry into the United States. And so we've made it very clear. If you look at our coast, we knew that as we started squeezing that balloon along the southern border, that traffic was going to push to the coast. And we've got Secretary Noem has the Coast Guard out there patrolling our coast. In the first 100 days, we've seized over 250,000 pounds of hard narcotics that would have gone to the streets of America if it wouldn't have been for the leadership of Secretary Noem. And so we continue to push. We plan for it. We expect it. We've got, 3,000 Texas National Guard that have been deputized under the authority granted us by Secretary Noem. We've got DEA, we've got Marshals, we've got ATF. If you are a law enforcement agency in the federal government of the United States, you have been brought into this fight against illegal immigration into this country, and everyone is out there fighting it every day, and that's why we're seeing the record lows that we're seeing, because we've made it a whole of government approach. I've heard the term whole of government approach my entire life, Allie. For the first time in my career, I'm seeing it brought to fruition. We are bringing a whole of government approach to fighting this illegal immigration and this narcotic smuggling, and we're seeing massive gains in it, and we're just getting started.
Yeah, and the post office is even involved now at this point. So really interesting to see that whole of government approach in action. And with that said, Chief, you talk about the hard narcotics that have been seized. We've seen a pretty substantial decrease in fentanyl. Where is the fentanyl going? Is it already here? DEA says the cartel is present in all 50 states. Most people don't believe that the cartel just gave up on fentanyl, but they also know they were killing people, killing their customers. What's going on with the fentanyl and the cartels, and how is Mexico's kind of response impacting the United States?
So actually, Mexico to some extent has been very responsive. They've sent over 10,000 Guardia Nacional, which is the equivalent of the U.S. National Guard for Mexico, to their northern border to help interdict that and prevent it from even making it to their northern border, our southern border. But what you're starting to see is, look, the cartel's not going to pack up and go home. So what the cartel's going to do is they're going to infight to try to take over area because they need more area now to try to push their narcotics through. The expectation is that as their properties, if you will, as they start taking over certain areas, then we look for them to try to regroup and make their push north. We're also starting to see that Mexico is branching out away from the United States and are pushing their fentanyl into other countries like Canada. They're pushing their fentanyl into South and Central America. They're pushing their fentanyl into Europe. And so we're seeing a turn in the hard narcotics. Instead of being pushed north into the United States, they're looking for new markets because we're closing the market on the United States.
Wow. And I mean, like we saw at the end of Title 42, right? They have to pivot. They might be doing this infighting to gain territory. It takes some time to get there. So that might be why we're kind of seeing a little bit of a lull. But you talk about those NDAs. There are now two. There's one in the New Mexico area, right? And then there's one in El Paso. Those are the two, I believe?
Correct. And combined, it's about 170 miles. One of the areas is annexed to Fort Bliss. The other is annexed to Fort Huachuca. And we're seeing great successes in that. Again, it's one more way to offer another consequence for entering the country illegally. It also unties the hands of our partners that are out there assisting us. And as we're seeing the successes in these NDAs, we expect to continue to grow in those NDA areas.
So we can expect to see those expand. Should we? And what is your support? Where does it lie on having U.S. troops combating the cartels? We just heard President Trump talking to one of my colleagues about how the Mexico president basically said, nope, we're not allowing that to happen. But Trump is essentially saying it needs to happen. There's not enough happening on the south side of the border. The U.S. troops need to go in here and handle the cartels. Do you believe that needs to happen? Would you support that? And would you support Border Patrol getting involved in some capacity?
So I don't want to get out over my skis and speaking ahead of the president or the head of Department of Defense, but what I can tell you from the U.S. Border Patrol perspective is the previous administration, the Biden administration, decimated the ranks, the morale, and the resources and capabilities of the United States Border Patrol. So we welcome and encourage anyone out there, law enforcement, DOD, National Guard, to come help us fight this fight. And they are. We are bringing everything but the kitchen sink at them. And so we absolutely need those resources, and we continue to need those resources until such time that the Border Patrol can rebuild its manpower, its resources, and its infrastructure. And we're expecting to get, some funding from, the Senate and the Hill, as well as the president here very shortly, which will help us shore up some of those defenses. But we absolutely need the Department of Defense, along with all of our other law enforcement partners, to continue fighting this fight until we can get back to where we need to be.
Well, and Chief, obviously whatever happens in Mexico has a direct impact to you and the men and women that serve under you. So would you support that U.S. crossover? If it's, Border Patrol probably wouldn't even go because I don't know if they have that jurisdiction. But if they could stop the cartel, if the U.S. military forces could, wouldn't that be a benefit for Border Patrol? So would you want that to happen, or do you want to be more in a reactionary stance if the cartels surge over the border, or what does that look like? I know you don't want to speak ahead of the president.
I support anything that we can do legally that will shut down the border. And I'm here to support the president and the secretary and doing anything we can do within our legal powers to get that border shut down.
Is there concern that the violence from the cartel are going to escalate? We were down in the Rio Grande Valley, had some rocks hurled at us while we were out in the boat cruise. Is there concern that the cartel is going to be more violent, that they're going to use bomb-wielding drones on our side of the border? Are those concerns ramping up for you as a Border Patrol chief?
So I'm always concerned for my agents in the field. We're always prepared. Right now the cartel is infighting to try to figure out, what territories they can control. But as we've seen over and over again, we do expect that once they establish that level of control on the south side, that they could push forward. I can tell you this, the United States Border Patrol is not only concerned, but we're prepared We train, we're well trained, we're one of the most professional law enforcement agencies in the United States, and we're actually prepared to meet that and stand up to that. We will not back down from the cartel. We will not back down from anyone. Our mission is to secure that border, and we're going to get it secure.
All right, we'll see you when zero crossings happen, boss. I appreciate you. So when it comes to the criminal cartels, that's the #1 target down here. They're trying to move people into the country illegally, trying to move drugs into the country illegally. And the Border Patrol chief says they're not going to back down. They're not going to back down to the cartel. They're not going to back down to anybody when it comes to securing the border. And he says that is the mission. The mission didn't change, and they will secure the border.